Ever feel like you could use a friend from, like, way back when, to give you some real advice about life? Well, today we're diving deep into Seneca's letters from a Stoic. Let's see what this Roman philosopher can teach us about dealing with friendships, crowds, and maybe even a bit about ourselves along the way.
You know what's amazing about Seneca's writing is how relatable it is. He doesn't shy away from getting personal, even vulnerable sometimes.
Yeah, totally. And he jumps right into it when he talks about friendship. In one letter, he says, "Indeed, I would have you discuss everything with a friend, but first of all, discuss the man himself." It's like he's waving a giant red flag before you even start a friendship. What do you think's up with that?
Well, it all circles back to this core Stoic principle of virtue being the most important thing. Seneca truly believed that before you open yourself up to someone, you have to really examine their character. Like, are they trustworthy? Do their values line up with yours? Are they even trying to be a good person? He's saying this isn't just about hanging out, it's about who we allow to have influence over us?
Yeah. That's a pretty intense question to ask someone you just met. So tell me, are you a good person?
Hmm. But it really makes you think about those times we become friends with people based on like superficial stuff rather than that deeper connection Seneca's talking about. Right. And this is where that whole concept of living in accordance with nature comes into play. It's not just some hippie thing about hugging trees. It's about recognizing that reason and virtue are at the core of what makes us human. And we should use those as the measuring stick for our relationships, too.
It's almost as if he's saying that the friends we choose are a reflection of our own judgment. So we better choose carefully. And speaking of choosing carefully, Seneca didn't exactly come across as a people person. It's like he was a bit wary of crowds, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. He definitely had a complicated relationship with crowds. He talks about how he'd go out to these big, chaotic gatherings and he'd never come back home quite the same. It was like they chipped away at his self-control, constantly tempting him away from his values.
Yeah, it's almost like how we feel doom scrolling on social media, right? You just get sucked in. And there's this quote from Seneca that always gets me. "I never bring back home the same character that I took abroad with me." You can practically hear the anxiety in his voice. He gets really vivid, too, when he describes those gladiatorial games, the violence, the spectators' bloodlust, and then he ties it all together, saying that enjoying that kind of spectacle actually leads to a decline in morality.
Yeah.
What do you make of that connection he draws?
Well, Seneca was a big believer in focusing on what you can control, meaning your own thoughts and reactions. But he also realized that certain environments, like those packed crowds at the Colosseum, could make it super hard to stick to your principles. It's like they just bombard you with vice and make it harder to listen to that inner voice pushing you toward virtue.
Okay, but those were gladiatorial games. Brutal stuff. How does that relate to us in this day and age?
It's about recognizing our own modern day Colosseums, right? Think about all the negativity constantly flowing on social media, or that pressure we feel to compare ourselves to everyone else. And then there's the news cycle, which seems practically designed to keep us outraged and afraid. These are all things that subtly influence our thoughts and actions, even if we're not aware it's happening. Just like those crowds that worried Seneca.
It's like we need to curate our mental diets just as carefully as we curate our Instagram feeds these days, right?
Totally. And that's a great transition into another one of Seneca's hot topics, wealth. Now, he wasn't totally against wealth, but he had some opinions on chasing after it. Something I think a lot of us can relate to, right?
Well, yeah, especially in today's world, it feels like we're constantly being told we need more, more, more. But Seneca makes a distinction between what's like essential, what we need, and then this idea of enough.
Exactly. He says, hold fast then to this sound and wholesome rule of life that you indulge the body only so far as is needful for good health.
Mm.
Basically, don't buy into the idea that more stuff equals happiness.
So true. It makes you wonder, how much is enough? Where's that line between enjoying what we have and just always craving more? Do we ever even ask ourselves that anymore?
Such an important question. And the Stoics actually had a way of thinking about this. See, they didn't believe true happiness or eudaimonia came from external things like wealth or possessions. They called those things indifferent externals, basically stuff that doesn't actually determine our well-being.
Okay, so a fancy sports car is an indifferent external. Got it. But then what does bring lasting happiness if it's not all that stuff?
Well, for the Stoics, it was all about living virtuously aligning your life with reason and acting in accordance with nature. Real contentment had to come from within, from working towards being a good person and making choices that match your values.
So it's less about chasing that next promotion or that bigger house and more about like living a more ethical and meaningful life, right?
I think I'm starting to see how this whole Stoic philosophy thing works, but it can't all be sunshine and virtue, can it? Like life throws curveballs. We
Right.
experience loss, things we can't control. How did Seneca think we should deal with that? It's interesting. He actually talks about this in a letter he wrote while going through a serious illness. And you want to know what he found comfort in. Not in wishing things were different, but in philosophy and having his close friends there for him.
Wow. It's like he found strength in something bigger than just himself. He even said something like, "It seemed to me that I should continue to live not with them, but through them," about his friends. That's really something.
It really is, and it gets to this Stoic belief that even when we're hurting, even when facing our own mortality, there's still a way to find meaning and even, yeah, joy. It's about shifting that focus from what we've lost to what remains, to the power of love and connection in our lives.
That's beautiful. But like on a practical level, it's still tough to imagine facing those really hard times with that kind of acceptance. How do you learn to be that resilient, to find the good when everything's falling apart?
Well, the Stoics had this interesting technique. They called it negative visualization.
Okay, now that just sounds messed up. Isn't the whole point of positive thinking to, focus on the positive?
It definitely sounds strange at first, but it's not about being a pessimist or anything. It's about mentally preparing yourself for the possibility that you might lose things you care about.
So like if I love my car, I should picture it getting totaled.
Well, in a way, yes, but it's not about dwelling on that negative image or wanting it to happen. It's about acknowledging that nothing lasts forever, really appreciating what you have right now, and strengthening your mind to face challenges with courage.
So it's more like mental training,
Hmm.
helping us appreciate what we have and build up this inner strength. That's pretty deep stuff. It's like we're building up these mental muscles,
Yeah.
right? Getting ready to face whatever life throws at us. But, there's that one unavoidable loss we all have to confront eventually.
Did Seneca have any words of wisdom on how to deal with, well, death?
He did, and it might not be what you'd expect. Seneca didn't see death as something to be afraid of. He saw it more as just a natural part of life.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's this one letter where he writes, "He who fears death will never do anything worthy of a man who is alive." It's like he's saying that being scared of dying actually prevents us from really living. Wow. Don't let the fear of the end stop you from having a full life, huh? That's kind of a reality check. Makes you think about your priorities, maybe even what you'd do differently if you weren't so worried about, everything ending.
Exactly. Seneca believed that understanding death, accepting that it's going to happen, could actually free us. Free us to live more fully, go after what we want with more passion, make the most of every moment.
It's about finding that balance, right? Embracing life, but also accepting that it won't last forever, so every moment is precious.
Hmm.
Which, reminds me of this whole experiment Seneca did with simple living. He spent time living like he was poor, even though he was actually quite wealthy. What do you think he was hoping to learn from that?
Well, he wrote about wanting to test himself, to see how resilient he really was, if he could let go of those anxieties that come with having wealth and status.
It's like a personal challenge.
Yeah. And what he discovered was that stripping things down to the bare essentials, getting rid of all the excess, it actually gave him a feeling of liberation.
He even tells this funny story about, like, feeling self-conscious when he came across someone in a much nicer carriage. You'd think a famous philosopher would be above that.
It just proves that we're all human in the end, right?
Yeah.
Even the most enlightened among us. But what's important is that Seneca realized how strong of a hold material things can have on us, even when we think we're above it all. He learned that real freedom isn't about accumulating more and more. It's about needing less.
That's a powerful message, especially now when we're constantly bombarded with messages telling us to want more, buy more, be more. Seneca was like the original minimalist. It makes you think twice about how we could apply that in our own lives, letting go of some of that baggage, those desires that might be holding us back from really living.
Absolutely. It's all about finding that sweet spot where you can appreciate what you do have while recognizing that true contentment. It has to come from within. It's not about what you own. And that doesn't just apply to physical things. It goes for our relationships, our careers, even our own thoughts. It's about asking yourself, what am I holding on to that might be preventing me from living a simpler, more fulfilling life?
Now, that's a question worth pondering. We've explored so much today, from the importance of choosing our friends wisely to facing our fears head on. We even dove into how to navigate wealth and loss. And even though Seneca's words were written centuries ago, his insights feel incredibly relevant to the challenges we face in our modern world. It seems like this ancient philosophy has something to offer all of us, no matter what our lives look like.
Couldn't agree more. And if there's one big takeaway from today's deep dive, it's that wisdom can come from the most unexpected places, even from ancient Roman philosophers. It's up to each of us to really listen to these ideas, think about them, and see how we can apply these timeless principles to our own lives.